She thought he was just the driver, nothing more. A man who opened car doors and stayed silent in the background. But one day, the spoiled daughter of a billionaire discovered a secret that would shatter her arrogance and teach her what real strength means. This is the story of Sophia and Mr. James. And trust me, you'll never look at people the same way again. Sophia Martinez lived in a world where everything sparkled. Her mansion sprawled across 12 acres of manicured gardens, with marble floors so polished you could see your reflection, golden chandeliers imported from Vienna, and walls lined with paintings worth more than most people's homes. She had every luxury money could buy: designer clothes that cost more than a teacher's monthly salary, a phone replaced every few months, and a credit card with no limit. But she also had something else: arrogance that cut deeper than any blade. At 16, Sophia had convinced herself she was better than everyone else, especially the man who had driven her to Westfield Academy every morning since she was 8 years old. Mr. James. James was a man in his early 50s with graying temples and hands that always wore simple, clean gloves. His uniform was always pressed, his shoes always polished. He spoke only when spoken to, which wasn't often, and he had this way of moving through the world that made him seem almost invisible. To Sophia, he was furniture with a heartbeat. Every morning the routine was the same. James would pull up in the sleek black Mercedes at exactly 7:15 a.m. He would step out, walk around to her door, and open it with a slight bow of his head. "Good morning, Miss Sophia," he would say quietly. Sophia would brush past him without acknowledgement, her designer bag swinging carelessly, sometimes bumping into his arm. She never said good morning back. She never said thank you. She never even looked him in the eye. On this particular morning, after failing her third chemistry exam in a row, Sophia slumped into the back seat with extra drama. She tossed her backpack carelessly across the leather seats and let out an exaggerated sigh that filled the entire car. "God, I hate school," she muttered, staring out the tinted window at the world rushing by. "These teachers are so unfair. They expect us to memorize everything like we're robots." James adjusted the rearview mirror slightly. Through it, Sophia could see his eyes. Dark brown, patient, always watching the road ahead. "Perhaps," he said gently, "if you—" "What?" Sophia snapped, finally looking up. "What could you possibly know about school? About anything I'm going through?" The car fell silent except for the soft hum of the engine and the distant sound of morning traffic. Sophia continued, her voice dripping with the casual cruelty that comes from never having to face consequences. "You wouldn't understand, James. You've never done anything important in your life. You just drive cars. That's it. That's all you'll ever do." In the mirror, James's eyes met hers for just a moment, and for that brief second, Sophia thought she saw something flash across his face. Not hurt exactly, but something deeper. Something she couldn't quite name. It made her feel uncomfortable in a way she didn't understand. Then James looked back at the road, his expression returning to that same calm, unreadable mask he always wore. "Yes, Miss Sophia," he said quietly, "I just drive cars." But there was something in his voice, a weight, a history, that Sophia was too young and too self-absorbed to recognize. 3 weeks later, on a particularly gray Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Sophia had endured another humiliating day at school. Her so-called friends had spent lunch gossiping about her latest academic failures, and her chemistry teacher, Mrs. Peterson, had handed back her exam with a bright red F circled multiple times. The paper had her name at the top and nothing else worth acknowledging. As James pulled away from the school's circular driveway, Sophia was already planning her afternoon of retail therapy. Maybe she'd buy those boots she'd been eyeing online, or perhaps she'd redecorate her bedroom again. anything to wash away the taste of failure. The rain had started as a light drizzle, but by the time they reached the highway, it was coming down in sheets. The windshield wipers worked frantically, creating a rhythmic soundtrack to Sophia's brooding. They were about 15 minutes from home when the car began to shudder. At first, Sophia didn't notice. She was too busy scrolling through Instagram, double-tapping photos of her classmates' perfect lives. But then the shuddering became more pronounced, and she looked up from her phone. "What's wrong with the car?" she demanded. James checked the dashboard, his expression growing concerned. "I'm not sure, Miss Sophia. The temperature gauge is climbing." Suddenly, white smoke began curling from under the hood, visible even through the heavy rain. The shuddering turned into violent jerking, and James carefully pulled over to the side of the road. The engine gave one final dramatic gasp and died completely. "Great!" Sophia exploded, throwing her phone onto the seat. "Just perfect. This is exactly what I needed today." She glared at James through the mirror. "When was this car last serviced? Don't you check these things? Isn't that your job?" James turned off the ignition and sat quietly for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof. Then he said calmly, "The engine has overheated, Miss Sophia. We'll need to wait for it to cool down before I can assess the damage." "Wait? For how long? I have plans." "I'm not certain. Perhaps an hour, maybe more." Sophia groaned and slumped back in her seat. "This is ridiculous. Call someone. Call a mechanic. Call another car. Do something." "I will, Miss Sophia. But first, let me check something." Instead of reaching for his phone, James looked out the passenger window. Through the rain-streaked glass, Sophia could see they had stopped near a cluster of older buildings. There was a small shopping plaza, a laundromat, and what looked like a community center with peeling paint and a sign that was barely readable through the weather. "I'll be right back," James said. And before Sophia could protest, he was out of the car. She watched him walk through the rain toward the community center, his shoulders straight despite the downpour. After a few minutes, when he didn't return, her curiosity overcame her irritation. Grabbing her designer jacket, Sophia stepped out into the rain. By the time she reached the building, her hair was plastered to her head and her expensive shoes were soaked through. The community center's front door was heavy and old, with chipped blue paint and a small window that had been taped over with cardboard. Sophia could hear voices coming from inside. Children's voices mixed with the sound of someone giving instructions. She pushed open the door. The first thing that hit Sophia was a smell. Not unpleasant, but completely foreign to her world of imported air fresheners and professional cleaning services. It smelled of old wood, honest sweat, and something else she couldn't identify. Something real. The second thing that hit her was the scene in front of her. The room was large but simple, with hardwood floors that had seen better decades and fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally. Mirrors lined one wall, though several had cracks running through them. On the opposite wall hung banners with words like discipline, respect, and courage written in bold, simple letters. And there in the center of the room stood about 20 children ranging in age from maybe 8 to 16. They were arranged in neat rows, all facing the same direction, all moving in perfect synchronization. Their clothes were a mix of hand-me-downs and thrift store finds, nothing like the designer uniforms Sophia was used to seeing at her private school. But it wasn't the children that made Sophia's jaw drop. It was the man leading them. Mr. James, her quiet, invisible driver, stood at the front of the room. But this wasn't the James she knew. This James moved with confidence and purpose. His voice carried authority and warmth as he called out instructions. His posture was straight and strong, like a soldier's, but his face held a gentleness Sophia had never noticed before. "Remember," he was saying, "martial arts isn't about hurting others. It's about discipline. It's about finding strength you didn't know you had. Now, ready stance. The children immediately shifted into position, their feet planted, their hands raised. Good. Now slow motion. Punch, block, kick. Focus on form, not speed. Remember, every movement has meaning. Sophia stood frozen in the doorway, rain still dripping from her hair, watching this man she thought she knew become someone completely different. One of the younger children, a girl who couldn't have been more than 10, was struggling with the sequence. Her movements were clumsy, uncertain. Instead of embarrassing her or moving on, James walked over and knelt beside her. "Don't worry about getting it perfect, Maria," he said softly. "Watch my hands. See how I move slowly? Martial arts is like learning to write. You start with simple letters before you write stories." He guided her through the movements patiently, his large hands gently adjusting her small ones. When she finally got it right, her face lit up like she'd just discovered fire. "Sensei James," another child called out, "can you show us that spinning kick again?" Sensei James. Sophia's heart pounded. She watched as James, this man she had dismissed as nothing more than hired help, demonstrated a complex series of movements that were both powerful and graceful. The children watched with the kind of attention Sophia had never given to anything in her life, their eyes shining with admiration and respect. After the demonstration, James divided the children into pairs. "Practice with control," he instructed. "Remember, your partner is helping you learn. Treat them with respect." As the children began practicing, Sophia noticed something that made her chest tighten. These kids weren't just learning martial arts. They were learning to stand taller, to look each other in the eye, to help each other up when they fell. She was so absorbed in watching that she didn't notice James walking toward her until he spoke. "Miss Sophia," his voice was gentle, but there was surprise in it. "Is everything all right?" Every child in the room turned to look at her. Sophia suddenly became aware of how she must appear, soaking wet, overdressed, standing there with her mouth hanging open, like she'd never seen people exercise before. I, I was waiting in the car, and you were gone, so she gestured helplessly at the room. "What is this place?" James smiled, and Sophia realized she had never seen him really smile before. It changed his entire face. "This is the East Side Community Center," he said. "I teach here 3 afternoons a week." "You teach?" Sophia's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Martial arts, life skills, whatever these kids need to learn." Sophia looked around the room again, seeing it with new eyes. These children weren't just playing around. They were serious, focused. They hung on James's every word like it was the most important thing they'd ever heard. "But why?" she asked. James was quiet for a moment, watching his students practice. Then he said, "Because someone needs to show them they matter. Someone needs to teach them that where they come from doesn't determine where they're going." For the next hour, Sophia sat in a corner of the room and watched. She watched James correct a boy's stance with infinite patience. She watched him encourage a shy girl to speak louder when she answered questions. She watched him break up a small disagreement between two students, not with anger, but with wisdom. "Marcus, Luis," he called to the two boys who had been pushing each other. "Come here." The boys approached reluctantly, their heads down. "What's the first rule of this dojo?" James asked. "Respect," they mumbled in unison. "And when we push each other, are we showing respect?" "No, Sensei James." "So what should you do instead?" The boys looked at each other. Marcus, who was taller and probably older, spoke first. "I'm sorry, Luis. I got frustrated because I couldn't get that kick right, and I took it out on you." Luis nodded. "It's okay. I shouldn't have laughed when you messed up." James smiled. "Good. Now how can you help each other instead of fighting?" "I could show Luis the kick I'm good at," Marcus offered. "And I could help Marcus with the one he's struggling with," Luis added. "Perfect. That's what we call turning competition into collaboration." Sophia watched this exchange with growing discomfort. These kids who probably had every reason to be angry at the world, were learning lessons about respect and cooperation that she'd never bothered to learn herself. When the class finally ended, the children gathered around James to bow and thank him. As they began to leave, chattering excitedly about what they'd learned, Sophia found herself still sitting in the corner, processing everything she'd witnessed. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice one of the children approaching her until he spoke. "Are you okay?" Sophia looked up to see a boy about her age, maybe 17, with kind eyes and calloused hands. His clothes were clean but worn, and there was a small scar above his left eyebrow. "I'm fine," she said automatically, the same dismissive tone she used with everyone. But instead of walking away, the boy sat down beside her. "You're Sensei James's boss, right? The girl he drives around?" Sophia bristled. "He's not my boss. He works for my family." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "Must be nice having someone drive you everywhere." "I guess." Sophia was getting uncomfortable with the conversation. "Look, I don't know why you're talking to me, but my name's David," the boy interrupted gently. "I've been coming here for 3 years." "Congratulations," Sophia said sarcastically. David smiled, which wasn't the reaction she'd expected. "You know, I used to be angry all the time, too." "I'm not angry, I was in a gang," David continued, his voice matter of fact. "Started when I was 13. My dad left when I was little. My mom worked 3 jobs just to keep us in our apartment, and I figured the streets were where I belonged." Despite herself, Sophia found herself listening. "I stole things. I lied to my mom about where I was going. I got arrested twice before I turned 15. David's voice grew quieter. "I was heading nowhere good, you know? Fast." "Why are you telling me this?" Sophia asked. "Because 3 years ago, Mr. James found me trying to break into his car." Sophia's eyes widened. "I was going to steal his radio, maybe his GPS, but instead of calling the cops or getting mad, he just asked me if I was hungry." David laughed softly. "Turns out I was. I hadn't eaten all day. So he bought me a sandwich and asked me if I wanted to learn something better than breaking into cars." David gestured around the room. "This place saved my life. Mr. James saved my life. He taught me that I didn't have to be what everyone expected me to be. He showed me that respect isn't something you take from people. It's something you earn." Sophia felt something twist in her stomach. That's great for you, but I'm graduating high school next month," David continued. "Got accepted to community college. I want to be a social worker, help kids like I used to be." He paused, looking directly at Sophia. "Before I met Mr. James, I thought the world owed me something. I thought everyone else was the problem." He stood up, brushing dust off his pants. "But the truth is, I was the problem, and I had to change before anything else could change." As David walked away to join his friends, Sophia felt a burning sensation in her cheeks. The boy's words echoed in her mind. "I thought the world owed me something." James appeared beside her, now changed back into his driver's uniform. "Ready to go, Miss Sophia? I called for a tow truck. Another car is on the way." Sophia looked up at him. This man she had dismissed, insulted, ignored for years. This man who spent his free time teaching children to believe in themselves. This man whose life outside of driving her around was apparently more meaningful than anything she had ever done. "James," she said quietly, and for the first time, she meant it as a question rather than a command. "Why do you do this?" James looked around the empty room, at the mirrors and the banners and the worn wooden floors where children learned to stand up straight and look the world in the eye. "Because," he said simply, "strength isn't in what you have, Sophia. It's in what you give." That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She lay in her king-size bed, staring up at the crystal chandelier that cast rainbow patterns on her ceiling. But all she could see were the faces of those children in the community center. their focus, their respect for James, their gratitude for lessons that had nothing to do with money or status. For the first time in her life, Sophia felt ashamed. She thought about David's story, how he'd gone from breaking into cars to planning for college. She thought about little Maria, struggling with her movements but never giving up. She thought about the way James had spoken to each child like they mattered, like their futures were important. And then she thought about how she had treated James every single day for 8 years. The next morning when James opened the car door for her, exactly 7:15 a.m., Sophia looked him in the eye. "Good morning, Mr. James," she said quietly. "And thank you." James paused, his hand still on the door handle. For a moment, surprise flickered across his face. Then he smiled, that same genuine smile she'd seen at the community center. "Good morning, Miss Sophia. You're very welcome." It was a small moment, but it felt enormous. Over the following weeks, Sophia began to change in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. She started actually listening in chemistry class instead of doodling in her notebook. When Mrs. Peterson handed back her next exam, a C plus, her best grade all semester, Sophia felt genuinely proud instead of entitled to something better. She began asking James questions during their rides to school, not demanding information, but actually asking. What was it like growing up in the city? How long had he been teaching martial arts? What made him decide to work with kids? James answered thoughtfully, and Sophia found herself fascinated by perspectives she'd never considered. He told her about serving in the military, about traveling to different countries, about learning that every person had a story worth hearing if you took the time to listen. "I thought I might volunteer somewhere," Sophia said one morning as they pulled into the school driveway. "Maybe help kids with their homework or something." James met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "The community center could always use extra help," he said carefully, "but it's not like volunteering at the hospital or the museum, Miss Sophia. These kids need consistency. They need people who show up." "I'll show up," Sophia said, and she meant it. The following Thursday, Sophia found herself back at the Eastside Community Center. This time, she wasn't there by accident. She was there to help. James introduced her to the children as Miss Sophia, who's going to be helping us out. No mention of her father's money or her family's name. Just Sophia, someone who wanted to help. The first few sessions were awkward. Sophia had no idea how to talk to kids who hadn't grown up with every advantage handed to them. She made mistakes, offered to buy things instead of offering her time, spoke down to them without realizing it, got frustrated when they didn't learn as quickly as she expected. But gradually, with James's gentle guidance and the children's surprising patience, she began to understand. She learned that 8-year-old Marcus was shy not because he wasn't smart, but because he stuttered and was embarrassed about it. She discovered that 13-year-old Priya was fiercely protective of her younger siblings and carried responsibilities Sophia couldn't imagine. She realized that these kids weren't looking for someone to feel sorry for them. They were looking for someone to believe in them. And slowly, Sophia learned to be that person. 3 months later, Sophia faced the biggest test of her life, and it had nothing to do with school. She was sitting in chemistry class on a Tuesday morning when her phone buzzed with an emergency alert notification. Then another, and another. Within minutes, every phone in the classroom was buzzing. Mrs. Peterson tried to maintain order, but it was impossible. Students were gasping, pointing at their screens, whispering in shocked voices. The headline was everywhere. Martinez Industries under investigation for fraud. Sophia's hands shook as she read the article. Federal investigators had raided her father's offices. There were allegations of embezzlement, tax evasion, bribing government officials. Photos of her father being led away in handcuffs were already circulating on social media. Her phone rang, her mother crying so hard Sophia could barely understand her words. "Come home immediately. Don't talk to anyone. Don't answer any questions. But as Sophia sat in the back of James's car, racing home through midday traffic, she realized there was nowhere to hide. By the time they pulled up to the mansion, news vans were already parked outside the gates. Reporters pressed against the car windows as James carefully navigated through the crowd. Miss Martinez, what do you know about your father's business practices? Sophia, how does it feel to learn your family's wealth might be built on lies? Any comment on the allegations? Sophia slumped down in her seat, pulling her jacket over her head. This was her worst nightmare. Not just her father's arrest, but the public humiliation. The knowledge that everyone at school would be talking about her family, judging her, probably secretly delighted that the rich girl had finally fallen. I can't go to school tomorrow, she whispered to James as they sat in the garage, safe from the cameras for the moment. I can't face everyone. James turned in his seat to look at her. His expression was kind but serious. Miss Sophia, he said gently, running away won't make this go away. But they'll all be staring at me. They'll all know. Know what? Sophia gestured helplessly. That my family are criminals. That everything I have is built on lies. That I'm not who they thought I was. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Who did they think you were? The question caught Sophia off guard. I don't know. Rich, I guess. Important. And who are you really? Sophia considered this. 3 months ago, she would have answered with a list of possessions or privileges. Now she thought about the children at the community center, about David, who'd overcome so much more than embarrassment, about little Maria, who never gave up even when the moves were difficult. I don't know, she admitted, but I'm trying to figure it out. James smiled. That's all any of us can do. And Sophia, the children at the center don't care about your family's money. They care about how you treat them. They care that you show up. The next day was one of the hardest of Sophia's life. Walking through the halls of Westfield Academy felt like running a gauntlet. Students stopped talking when she passed, then resumed their conversations in excited whispers. Some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, a few with barely concealed satisfaction. At lunch, Sophia's usual table was awkward and tense. Her friends, though she was beginning to question if they'd ever really been friends, didn't know how to act around her. The conversation was stilted, full of careful euphemisms and uncomfortable silences. So, one girl finally said, are you going to have to, change schools or something? I don't know, Sophia answered honestly. What about your car? And your clothes? Will you have to get a job? The questions came rapid fire, more curious than concerned. Sophia looked around the table at these people she'd known for years. She realized that none of them were asking if she was okay. None of them were offering support. They were treating her downfall like entertainment. Excuse me, she said quietly and walked away. She spent the rest of lunch in the library, trying to focus on homework, but mostly just thinking about how different her problems seemed compared to what the kids at the community center dealt with every day. David had faced potential prison time and had rebuilt his entire life. These kids worried about having enough food, about staying safe in their neighborhoods, about parents who worked multiple jobs just to pay rent, and she was worried about embarrassment. That afternoon, when James picked her up from school, Sophia was quiet during the ride. How was your day? He asked gently. Awful, Sophia admitted. Everyone was staring. Everyone was talking about me. I imagine that was difficult. James? Sophia met his eyes in the rearview mirror. Can we go to the center today? I know it's not Thursday, but I could use the reminder. Reminder of what? That there are bigger problems than mine. When they arrived at the community center, David was there early, practicing alone. He looked up when Sophia walked in, her school uniform wrinkled, her hair disheveled from a day of hiding from stares and whispers. Rough day? He asked. Sophia laughed, but it came out as more of a sob. You could say that. David set down his water bottle and walked over. Want to talk about it? So Sophia told him everything. About her father's arrest, about the reporters, about feeling like her entire life was a lie, about being afraid to face her classmates. David listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You know what I learned in here? He finally said. That you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to it. Easy to say. Not easy at all, David corrected. The hardest thing in the world, actually. But look at it this way. Now you get to find out who you really are when all the other stuff is stripped away. James walked over, having overheard the conversation. David's right, he said. This isn't the end of your story, Sophia. It's just the beginning of a different chapter. Sophia looked around the room, at the cracked mirrors, the worn floors, the simple banners with their powerful words. How do I do it? How do I face everyone tomorrow? The same way you face anything difficult, James said. One step at a time, with your head up, with dignity. What if they laugh at me? Then you remember that their opinion of you matters less than your opinion of yourself. And you remember that respect isn't about what you have. It's about how you treat others. Sophia nodded, wiping her eyes. Will you help me practice? Practice what? Standing tall. For the next hour, James and David worked with Sophia on more than just physical posture. They talked about confidence, about inner strength, about the difference between being humble and being humiliated. Remember, James said as they prepared to leave, tomorrow isn't about proving anything to them. It's about proving something to yourself. The next morning, Sophia walked into Westfield Academy with her shoulders straight and her head held high. Yes, people stared. Yes, there were whispers and pointed fingers. But Sophia had learned something important in that community center. Real strength wasn't about avoiding difficult situations. It was about walking through them with grace. When a reporter cornered her after school, shoving a microphone in her face and asking for her reaction to her father's crimes, Sophia didn't run or hide behind James. Instead, she looked directly into the camera and said, I can't speak for my father's actions, but I can speak for my own. And I'm committed to learning from this experience and becoming the person I want to be, regardless of my circumstances. It wasn't a perfect statement, but it was honest, and it was hers. 6 months later, Sophia was a different person living the same life. She still lived in the mansion, though it was quieter now with her father in federal prison. She still attended Westfield Academy, though she'd lost some friends and gained a few better ones, and James still drove her to school every morning. But everything had changed. Good morning, Mr. James, Sophia said as she got into the car, the same greeting she'd been using for months now. Good morning, Sophia. Ready for your presentation today? Sophia smiled. She was giving a speech to her classmates about the community center, trying to recruit volunteers for a new tutoring program she'd helped design. I think so. A little nervous, but ready. As they drove through the city, Sophia looked out the window at the world she was finally learning to see clearly. She thought about David, who was thriving in college, and planned to return to the community center as a full-time counselor after graduation. She thought about little Maria, who now helped teach the newer students and had grown confident and strong. She thought about all the children who taught her that respect was earned through actions, not inherited through wealth. James, she said as they pulled up to school, thank you. For the ride? Always. Number for everything. For showing me what real strength looks like. James smiled in the rearview mirror. You found that strength yourself, Sophia. I just helped you realize it was there. Sophia stepped out of the car, her presentation notes in hand, ready to face her classmates not as the poor little rich girl whose family had fallen from grace, but as someone who had learned that true worth isn't measured by what you possess, but by what you contribute. She had once believed James was just the driver, but he had driven her somewhere far more important than any destination on a map. He had driven her toward becoming the person she was meant to be. Some people you overlook might be carrying the very lessons you need most. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Because sometimes the driver of your life isn't behind the wheel of a car, but behind the wisdom they choose to share. And that wisdom, once received, can change everything. The most powerful transformations don't happen overnight. They happen one choice at a time, one day at a time, one moment of courage at a time. Sophia learned that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about how you choose to stand up. And sometimes the person who teaches you how to stand isn't who you expected at all. If this story touched your heart, subscribe now and join us in spreading more hope, more love, and more stories that truly matter.